This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So yesterday, Kim Jong-un did his quarterly missile test, this time an ICBM that was in flight for 50 minutes, longest duration yet, that descended.
It soared 2,800 feet in the air.
Yeah, and landed off the coast of Japan. President Trump had this to say about that.
A missile was launched a little while ago from North Korea. I will only tell you that we will take care of it. We have General Mattis in the room with us, and we've had a long discussion on it. It is a situation that we will handle.
And Mattis, was in the room and provided a little bit more detail.
It went higher, frankly, than any previous shot they've taken. It's a research and development effort on their part to continue building ballistic missiles that could threaten everywhere in the world, basically.
And so the question is, does that change our strategy with respect to North Korea or the geopolitical dynamics of our relationship with our allies in the region, including the South Koreans and the Japanese? For answers to those questions, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Jim Carafano, who is the Vice President of Foreign Policy and National Security at the Heritage Foundation, a West Point grad, 25-year Army veteran. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, good to be with you.
So the response from the president, just kind of a general reassuring, we'll take care of it. But does this missile launch and Mattis's comments that it essentially provides Kim Jong-un with the ability to use an ICBM to strike anywhere in the world, does that change our strategy, or should it change our strategy with respect to North Korea?
No, I mean, people kind of freak out every time they do these things. If you actually look at the development path of a nuclear program, what they're doing is just the steps you would normally see. So each individual step isn't a new provocation or a change. It's just like something coming off the assembly line. So now what they've demonstrated is they can get a missile to fly a long way, ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile. That means if you turn that missile around, shoot it the other way, and shoot over the North Pole, and it flies to the full extent of its range, you can range most targets, including cities in the United States, get the missile there in kind of under 30 minutes. Doesn't mean yet that you have a threat like a Russia or a China, because you don't have the numbers. And also, they've yet to demonstrate they can put a warhead on there. They can solve the problem of the warhead reentering, surviving the heat and all that. Eventually, they'll do that. Hell, we did it 40 years ago. I have to laugh, though, when I see people tweeting like, oh, we need to change our strategy. I mean, you don't do that. I mean, this is like 5 minutes after Truman announced the Truman Doctrine and said, well, containment's obviously not working. The whole idea of a strategy is you make a plan which is feasible, reasonable, and acceptable, and then you stick to it over time, knowing that you will achieve the outcomes that you want.
But isn't part of that plan to derail that North Korean nuclear program before it's fully actualized?
No, because you can't really do that. I mean, the only way you can really do that is go in and overthrow the regime or get the regime to voluntarily do that or under pressure. None of those things are going to happen. So what you can do is we have to go back to remember what are we doing here? What's our goal? And our goals are really twofold. One is that there's not a war in Northeast Asia because that's bad for everybody. And the other is that Kim does not have a capability that can threaten us, that he can do nuclear blackmail with the United States. Then you go back and say, well, can we achieve those goals without overthrowing the country or some unrealistic thing about just buying the guy off? And the answer is yes. Between the combination of missile defense, strategic and conventional deterrence, sanctions, we can really limit his capacity to build out any kind of missile arsenal that can threaten us. That's the rational, practical path forward. And when the President, General Mattis, and Secretary Tillerson talk about this thing, that's what they're talking about.
Well, don't we need the help from China, too, to make that happen?
Well, we're kind of in a win-win situation with China. I mean, the administration's actually been pressuring China. And what Trump has actually found, and he gets no credit for this, is by that consistent pressure and unwillingness to relent, China has gradually, because they don't want a war in the region either, gradually ratcheted up some sanctions. And I think what we're finding, as long as we continue that pressure, we may get a satisfactory answer out of that. But the truth is if China doesn't do it, we'll do it to Chinese companies. So it's going to happen either way, and so we're kind of in the driver's seat here.
And so talk to us a little bit about missile defense, because this is one of the components to the strategy as well, and certainly an important consideration for allies that are in close proximity to North Korea, like China and South Korea and Japan.
When people talk about nuclear strategy, often they're talking like we live in the 1960s, in the age of mutually assured destruction, where the purpose is everything is so devastating that nobody would dare do anything, right? That's not the world we live in anymore. We have gone from strategies with countries like Iran and North Korea, from a retaliatory strategy to what's called a protect and defend strategy, which is not only if you shot something at us, could we shoot something back and blow your country off the earth, but your missile will never reach us. And this is the idea of missile defense. And this administration, to its credit, has just put in $4 billion additional dollars in missile defense. The problem with missile defense under Obama was he was willing to do it because he didn't want to accept the criticism of not doing it. But he's just like, just give me barely enough missile defense so I can credibly say I have something that matches what North Korea potentially might do. What Trump is doing is moving to a strategy is, let's build so much missile defense that the bar is so high that the North Koreans can never dream in their lifetimes of ever actually having a credible threat that could reach the United States. That's the missile defense strategy that we should have had with North Korea all along. And I would argue if we had that strategy today, Kim might not be building these missiles, not because he doesn't want them, but because he realized it's a waste of money and a waste of time.
Well, how's our missile defense system now? I mean, can we sleep at night knowing we're not going to be nuked in the middle of the night?
Well, for two reasons. One is they haven't yet demonstrated they actually have a military capable weapon that can reach that can get to the United States. So you can sleep well because they don't have it yet.
But that's not what everybody was saying yesterday. They were saying that if they put this, ICBM, a nuclear warhead attached to that it could reach Los Angeles, Washington, D.C. So is that just a lie?
Well, here's the deal, right? First of all, you have to have not just a developmental weapon, but you have to have a fleet of those to shoot at us, which they don't have yet, and so the actual production capacity. And the other thing is you have to put the nuclear bomb on the missile, which is you have to get it small enough to fit on the missile, which they'll be able to do. I have no doubt about that. But then you also have to demonstrate that warhead can survive reentry. And so that means that you can manage the intensive heat of coming back in. Like, we used to send astronauts into space in the Apollo and Mercury programs, and they come back in, you have the heat shield and all that. They have to demonstrate that as well. I am confident that they will at some point have a missile that could actually deliver a nuclear warhead against the United States. But I am also confident that if we stay on the strategy that we have, and this is the irony here, everybody thinks we're heading towards a crisis. If we actually stay on this path, we're not. We're actually heading in the opposite direction. Because by the time North Korea can build anything that's militarily capable, if the sanctions are working, they won't be able to build out their arsenal. Our nuclear and missile defenses will be so robust that essentially they can't touch us. So the irony is if we stick on the strategy, what happens over time is North Korea to us actually becomes less dangerous, not more.
Now, is that that position on North Korea that you just articulated also applicable to Iran?
It would be. But the difference with dealing with Iran and North Korea is North Korea is a crummy little country which is stuck at the end of the earth with nothing. Iran is in the middle of the Middle East. They have lots of resources, including energy, and they're not isolated in the way North Korea is. And they have innumerable surrogates in Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels and other things to screw with other countries. So Iran, in many ways, is a much bigger and more complicated problem.
Well, right, but I mean just specifically with nuclearization and their capacity there.
Right, and this again is where I think we lost ground under Obama because, we had a missile defense shield that was going into Europe, which would have protected Europe and the United States. And essentially he kind of gutted that with a system which wasn't as necessarily as robust. So again, we're playing catch up. And I think the answer is whether it's our allies in the Middle East or Europe or the United States itself, the first thing we want to do is build missile defense shields which are so robust that the fence is so high the Iranians can never jump over it to start with. And that's the way you begin to start to deal with these threats.
And give us your best estimate on what the horizon is to get to the missile defense systems to where you suggest they need to be.
Well, if we fund at the level that this administration plans, and we continue to do the research and development on additional capabilities, what we're all looking for here is something that's called boost phase intercept, which is you have the ability to actually knock the missile out as it's actually flying up. The advantage of that is that's good against everything: short, medium, long-range missiles. It doesn't matter where the missile's headed. It doesn't matter if it's headed for Paris or New York City. It's a tougher from a technical standpoint because one, you have to detect the missile right away. Two is you have to be able to get it when it's coming off, which means two things. Either you need something that's right close by, like a drone that's constantly flying around there waiting to take off, or you have an interceptor in space, which basically knocks it out as it's coming up. Those are technologies which are achievable under the current science, but they're actually not the most expensive things in the world, but we'd have to develop them, and that would take a couple of years. So if we start a research and development track on that, and we continue to build the family of missile defenses that we have now, which include long-range interceptors that are based in the United States, interceptors that are based on ships at sea, and also ones that we can put on land, which can deal with short and medium-range missiles, we'll be fine.
All right. He is Jim Carafano. By the way, you could get more of Jim Carafano. He's the featured guest on Against the Current this week at upstream-ideas.com. We cover the rest of the globe we didn't have time to cover today, including the status of the U.S. military in terms of readiness and modernization. Jim Carafano, Vice President of Foreign Policy and National Security at the Heritage Foundation. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks. Do it again.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup